Many types of carnivorous plants, such as North American pitcher plants and Venus flytraps, come from boggy environments. It's important to have your peat moss damp at all times to achieve healthy carnivorous plants. Well, in this video I'm going to be discussing tips on how to best use your water tray to achieve healthy carnivorous plants. Okay, so because many carnivorous plants live in boggy environments where the peat moss is constantly damp, the best way and the easiest way to keep the peat moss damp is simply by filling your water tray with water. Okay, so just fill it all the way up to the top. This is quite a shallow water tray. Good thing about these water trays is that they, as well as provide water to the peat moss, they also provide humidity, and just like to fill it all the way up like that. And that's a really good way of keeping that peat moss nice and damp. While these shallow water trays do a great job of hydrating your plants and providing a nice microclimate of humidity as the water evaporates, they do have their limitations. Now these trays here, they're only about, say, 2 centimeters deep. Obviously, being so shallow, they only have a limited amount of water. Now that can be very important when those temperatures get high during those summer days. The last thing you'll want is for your tray to evaporate and leaving your plants high and dry just when they need that water. Now this came home to me when, before I started my nursery, I had a lot fewer plants and I used to grow these plants in these water trays. Before I'd go to work in the morning, I'd fill these water trays up to the max. When I came home from work in the afternoon, I realised that the water had completely evaporated. Now that was a sign there that these were too shallow and I needed a deeper, larger water tray. Now, if that's happening to you, you may want to consider something like this. As you can see here, it's very presentable, having all different types of your pot plants sitting in that one water tray. It's got a nice little, it's a nice little sort of mini garden happening. By having a deeper, bigger water tray, obviously it's going to contain more water, and that's going to be like an insurance that that water is going to be there when the temperatures are very high and you're not home. Just a few things to consider is it's best to use plastic or some other non-conductive type of material that's not going to conduct heat too much. The last thing you want to do is use a metal water tray. That's going to conduct too much heat, and that's going to really increase the temperature of the water, which will provide heat stress for your plants because that water temperature is just going to be too high. Another thing to consider is when you're filling the tray up, make sure that you don't go above the halfway mark, okay? Now, it helps to have same size pots, as you can see right here. Just makes it easier to see where that halfway mark is. Now, I know North American pitcher plants can tolerate more dampness around the roots, not so much Venus flytraps. They don't want to have too much dampness around the roots, and by not going beyond that halfway mark, then you're ensuring those plants aren't overwatered. Ideally, you want to keep it around about a quarter-way mark, but you can go above that, but not over the halfway mark, okay? But at the end of the day, what's most important is that these plants don't dehydrate and suffer heat stress during those high temperatures, okay? And by having a bigger water tray, then, as I said, this is an insurance policy that, an insurance that your plants will be happy and hydrated. Now, another thing that's important as well, it's a good tip, is that if you have a large water tray like this, it's best to sort of fill that water tray up with pots, okay? Ideally, you want to have it all full with pots in there. The reason is because if you have an open area like this, what happens is when the sun's rays are hitting that water then heats up very quickly. And what will happen is, again, the water temperature will rise, and that will cause heat stress to your plants. To try to make it as cool as possible, it's best to cover that water with the pots in there. Those pots sort of prevent the sun hitting that water directly, and that will sort of keep that water cooler for longer. So another useful tip, if it starts raining outside, don't be afraid to take out your pot plants from your tray and just place them directly under the rain. Now, as well as receiving nourishing rainwater and keeping your plants hydrated, what happens is the rainwater, as it's filtering through the peat moss, it takes away any dissolved contaminants in the form of phosphates, chlorides that may be in the water. Now, it's important to have your pot just directly out in the rain without any water tray underneath. By having that rainwater filtering through the peat moss, it takes out those contaminants directly through the base of the pot. It's just another way of maintaining a nice, healthy peat moss environment for your plant. And that's going to really, really keep your plant happy and very, very healthy. Another tip is also to completely flush out the water in your tray, say once every 2 weeks. Again, it's all about completely flushing out any dissolved salts that may be in the water. So yeah, it's just a couple of tips when you're using a water tray. So another way of flushing out unwanted contaminants in the form of dissolved salts in water, you can always water from the top. So it's a good idea to water from the top, say every couple of weeks, once every couple of weeks, and that ensures that if there's any build-up of salts in the peat moss or in the pot, watering from the top is going to flush those contaminants out. Okay, now do that, pour it until you start to see water coming out from the bottom. Of course, you don't use a water tray for this because you want all that water to drain out along with any contaminants. Another tip is when you're watering from the top with Venus Flytraps, make sure that you don't pour over the traps. So you can see that open trap there. I wouldn't want to water over that because that would cause the trap to close. Remember, there are trigger hairs on the inside of those lobes, so you don't want those traps to close without getting any nutrient benefit out of that. It's just basically wasting energy for the plant. So just carefully water around those traps, until you start to see water coming out from the bottom of the pot.